Yay. Um, I'm Jean Raddick, Presbytery leader, Presbytery of the Highlands, and John, introduce
Uh,
yourself.
yes,
John
John
Hellriegel.
Ware. I'm clerk of session at Union Hill in Denville.
Oh, wrong John. Thanks though, John, for that. I'm talking about John Hellriegel, our
So I'll
other
be,
presenter.
yeah, so I'll be presenting tonight. I'm John Hellriegel. I'm an elder with Community Presbyterian Church in Chester, and I head the Funds Development Committee for the Presbytery. Good to see you.
And tonight, as many of you know, we've been working on since February, doing these presentations on to helping you all develop a financial sustainability plan. And one of the things we heard, we were planning on doing this, but we heard this really strong from the cohorts is what goes into a financial sustainability plan. And so John and I will be talking about the components of a financial sustainability plan, knowing that there are many parts, but these are the major pieces that will help you develop one for your church. So we will be doing that. I'll make a presentation first about what are the components of the plan, and then John has a tool which was sent out this afternoon, but for some reason it got linked to our presbytery's retirement policy, which if you want to read, that's fine. So a second one should have gone out with with the correct link. If not, it is on our webpage. Go to the financial sustainability project drop down, and it's right there. And when I get a chance, I'll put it in the chat for you also to find. But sorry about the mistake. Somehow it gave me the wrong, or I picked the wrong link. So we do, if you Presbytery doesn't have a retirement policy, there's a good one for you to use. Okay. Let me get things queued up here, and I will share my screen. All right. What are the components of a church financial sustainability plan? Financial sustainability means building a system where your church's income supports its expenses, both now and into the future. It's more than just balancing the budget year by year. It's about that long-term planning and wise stewardship. And the plan includes or can include looking ahead beyond that current budget year, taking intentional steps to grow income and to manage cost. It's about preparing for changes in expenses, such as inflation, uh, unexpected board pension changes, or any other unexpected needs. We also believe that talking about money is both normal and theological and biblical. Because if you think about it, Jesus talked about money all the time. And most importantly, financial sustainability is a team effort. It's not just for the treasurer or for the finance committee, or in some cases for the pastor. It involves the educators, the worship leaders, the pastor. Everyone has a role in shaping and supporting a faithful financial plan. So our discussion tonight is about the components or elements of developing a financial sustainability plan. Every church will be different, and there are probably other components or elements. A lot has to do with your context. So one of the first things is encouraging generosity and financial management. You need to talk about generosity and talk about abundance. What you need to do is avoid the do or die messaging. Focus on hope and mission and possibility rather than fear or desperation or the threats. The threat that, if we don't raise enough money, we're going to have to shut off the lights or we won't have enough to heat. This only creates an environment of scarcity, not generosity. Our goal is to create and talk about generosity. Emphasize impact. With your gifts, we can do this, we can do that. That kind of emphasis is more inspiring than you need to give. Highlight real stories. Talk about how lives have been transformed by your generosity. Use multiple channels to talk about generosity. Share messages in the newsletter, in the announcement time, on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and during worship. Find different ways to talk about it intentionally. Integrate into preaching and discipleship. Regularly include themes of stewardship and generosity in sermons and teaching. Pastors don't always like to preach that one sermon, but there's ways of talking about generosity and stewardship throughout the whole lectionary cycle. Offer financial education. And not just the church's financial education, but host financial workshops to empower members with tools for personal and community stewardship. When people feel good about or have good feeling about their own personal finances, they are more likely to look at everything with generosity and abundance and not scarcity. There's a lot of good curriculum out there on stewardship and discipleship and financial education. Adapt to your context. Scale your efforts to fit your church's size. We will be telling you a lot of things, and sometimes it might be overwhelming for the size of your church. So scale your efforts to fit your church's size, your church's culture, and capacity. Start where you are. Don't start where another church is. Start where you are and work from there. Equip leaders with the knowledge and confidence to talk about money faithfully and effectively. Make it part of officer training. Make it part of session conversations. When they feel comfortable about talking about it, they in the session or the deacons, then they can be more effective talking about it to the congregation as a whole. Managing income and expenses faithfully is another component. Understand your expenses. And we've had some workshops on that, one on insurance. We have one coming up on Board of Pensions. So as we know in the budgeting process, some items are fixed. Salaries, insurance, board of pensions. Others are flexible. Major expenses typically include the staff, the pastor's compensation, and all those associated costs. Property expenses are expensive. Maintenance, insurance, utilities, those are kind of, I don't want to say fixed, but they are the big ones in any budgeting process nowadays. Have the hard conversations with each other. Financial stewardship sometimes requires difficult decisions. And don't shy away from those hard decisions, and try to anticipate them and be talking about it, knowing you can have the conversation, but you don't have to make the decision right at that session meeting or that congregational meeting, but start having those conversations. Keep your mission front and center in all these conversations and as you're talking about money. How do our expenses reflect our calling to following Jesus Christ today? How does our income reflect our calling as disciples of Jesus Christ today? Keep those front and center. Plan for long-term income. Most churches plan from budget year to budget year, from pledging season to pledging season, and don't think beyond that. Consider diverse and sustainable income sources. Pledging is a good one, and regular giving, and really focusing on that. That's often the largest source of income. Investment income. Look at your investments differently, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Legacy giving and bequest, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Another one is fundraisers. There are some fundraisers that you don't make much money, but if whatever the point, that might not have been the point of the fundraiser, but there are types of fundraisers that take probably a lot of energy of the congregation, but they have some payback. Chicken dinners. We have one of our small congregations that they do those quarterly. That helps pay for the preacher. Peach Festival is a big one that John likes to talk about. Align spending with your values. What do we believe is essential for the ministry of Jesus Christ in our community? That's the question you should be asking. Are we funding what we say we value? Nothing is more discouraging to say to the congregation, we believe in young leader faith formation, and then turn around and cut the budget for the youth program. Are we funding what we say we value? Think ahead about property cost. What large property expenses are likely in the coming years? Roof, HVAC is always a big one. Parking lot is falling apart, those kind of things. Are we insurance increases? Those are the kind of those big ones. Develop a long-range plan for anticipated property needs of those big ticket items that come along once every 25, 30 years. Use property as a ministry tool. How can we use this space to serve the mission of Christ today? Can we lease the space or share the cost of this space for ministry with community partners or nonprofits to help offset the cost and serve the community? Legacy giving. We already did a workshop on that. It's on our webpage. Rose Niles did that for us. But legacy giving is planning for the church's future. Have a plan for when the gifts come. Don't wait until a legacy gift arrives. Be prepared before that. I've seen that happen so many times. A church will call up and say, we just got a gift of $200,000. We don't know what we're supposed to do. Know what you're going to do ahead of time. Know how to use that. So many of the legacy gifts may have it may be dedicated or restricted in some way, but many of them are not. And how you use those legacy gifts encourages people to leave legacy gifts. So know what to do when before the legacy gift arrives. And part of that is deciding in advance how such gifts will be used to support long-term ministry, not just, oh, great, we got $200,000, that'll cover the budget for the next 5 years or whatever. Help donors plan their gifts wisely. Encourage giving that supports the church's mission, legacy giving, that supports the church's mission without overly restrictive designations. That includes, so that means you need to talk about legacy giving and have information about it for that. My husband served a church way back, and someone back in the early 1900s left a gift, a pretty substantial gift for back then, And the income off it was to be used to put a wreath of flowers on the window dedicated to their daughter every Easter. Seriously, that was very specific. And by the time he got there, that fund was over $150,000. That's a lot of wreaths to hang. Those are expensive wreaths. And so it was very restrictive, and they could not use it. And it becomes very complicated after that to get to change those kind of bequests. So make sure you help people understand what is the best use of their gift that will not restrict the church, but help them grow. So offer guidance so their legacy aligns with the church's future needs. Frame the legacy giving as a promise of hope. Talk about legacy gifts as an investment in the future of the church, and it's a way to witness to God's ongoing work through future generations. Make legacy giving and legacy planning, make it a year-round conversation. Legacy giving is not a one-time campaign and then you don't talk about it for another 10 years. Keep it in front of the congregation through stories, reminders. Just today I heard about just having a thank you to those who have informed you that they have left the church in their will. Have planned giving resources available for people, that kind of thing. Create a gift acceptance policy. Establish clear guidelines for receiving and managing legacy gifts. People really appreciate that. And also gives the session an opportunity to say no to a gift that really is not right for the church, such as someone gave a church a parking lot that was down the street from the church. This person owned it. They gave it to the church, but it used to be a gas station. And the cost of remediating that to make that property worthwhile, it was too expensive and too costly. And they just made it clear they didn't accept those kind of gifts. And it was easy for them to say, our policy says this. Also, people have given stocks and stuff like that, expecting the church to hang on to it. And so you need a policy to say, are we going to hang on to it or not? Are we going to sell it? That kind of thing. How are we going to manage that kind of thing? So it helps protect both the donor's intent and the church's ability to use the gift wisely. The Presbyterian Foundation has lots of resources on all these things I've just mentioned. And as we've heard before, Rose Niles, our foundation person, is available to talk about legacy giving specifically in your church. Understanding your investments is another component. Understanding investments as an income source. Rethink the rainy day mindset when it comes to your investments. I literally was working at a church in Montana, and I was working with a pastor, and the pastor was trying to convince the session to use their investments, their savings, to build a new sanctuary. Now, it's a little bit different than trying to build a sanctuary on the East Coast. And this was also 40 years ago. And they were like, well, we can't use that. And between the sanctuary and the fellowship building, there was like a breezeway. And we were all leaving the meeting and we were walking through the breezeway to go towards the parking lot. And it was raining outside. And they said, we're saving it for a rainy day. And they're saying that as they walk through a breezeway where the rain is pouring through the roof. And he says, it's raining. So let's kind of rethink that rainy day mindset when it comes to our investments. Investments aren't just for emergencies. They can and should support the ongoing mission of the church. So make your investments work for the ministry. Use investment income to strengthen the church's financial foundation. Consider using investments for operating budget or special projects or capital improvements. But think through what your investments are doing and how they can you can use them today and not on that rainy day. Know what you need. How much invested principal is required to generate the income you need? Define your goals so you can align investment strategies accordingly, and also connect to gift acceptance and legacy planning. Ensure that your gift acceptance policy allows for gifts to be invested strategically. You should have an investment policy. How do we invest money? Encourage legacy gifts to grow your investment base for future ministry. And invest with purpose. Align your investments use with your mission and values. Don't let money sit idle. Let it support the work of the Church of Christ in your community. And on July 8th, just mark this down, July 8th, New Covenant Trust, which is the Presbyterian, their investments. They do investments for the Presbyterian Church. New Covenant Trust leadership will be leading a workshop on investments for the church. And that information just went out today. Utilize your resources and assets for ministry. Start by asking, what do we have? Identify all your assets, not just your financial ones. Key asset areas to consider: property, buildings, lands, parking lots, volunteers. They got time, skills, and passion. Your staff has experience, leadership. They have networks. Never underestimate a network. Financial assets, savings, investments, endowments. Your community connections are assets, local partnerships and relationships, faith community strengths such as spiritual gifts, your traditions, your shared ministry. These are all key assets that we sometimes forget to use and to tap into. Explore creative uses of your property. Like I said earlier, leasing the space to community organizations, shared use with other congregations or nonprofits, sale of underutilized property to support ministry goals. An example, this is probably not an example for New Jersey, but I did an assessment of a church in the state of Maine, and the church was given a tree farm, which was about 5 acres of planted pine fir trees, probably 40 years before that. They've never did anything with it. They didn't see it as an asset, but that property, those trees were worth a lot of money, and they just didn't see it. So look for those things you're not seeing that could be an asset. Just beware when you're selling property and stuff like that, or leasing property. You do need permission from the presbytery for certain actions. So, check with the presbytery on some of those things. Use what doesn't cost money. Take advantage of those. Tap into volunteer networks. Share staff or programs with other congregations to reduce cost. Good example is VBS. Work with the Methodist Church down the street to do a VBS. Partner with community groups for mutual benefit. And think strategically, not just financially. Align resource use with your mission. How can these assets serve the ministry of Jesus Christ today? We got a couple more. Building a meaningful stewardship campaign. Focus on storytelling and narrative budgets. We have a narrative budget workshop coming and a stewardship campaign workshop coming in August. So I'll go over this quickly. In stewardship campaigns, do not send out one letter with a pledge card and say you've done your stewardship campaign. That is not a stewardship campaign. That's just lazy. Do the work. Don't assume one letter will inspire giving. Be intentional and personal and consistent in your messaging. Start early, build a team. Now's the time to start your planning for your fall stewardship. Effective stewardship takes planning. Start months ahead. Form a dedicated team to lead and coordinate the effort. Tell stories, not just numbers. Use a narrative budget to show how giving fuels ministry. Share real stories of how lives are being changed by your generosity. And they are in every church. I've never known of a church that lives weren't changed. Focus on generosity and abundance. Invite people into a vision of what's possible, not just what's needed. Emphasize God's abundance, not scarcity. We can't say that enough. Make stewardship a year-round conversation. It isn't just for the fall. It is a discipleship practice. Stewardship is discipleship. Teach that giving is a spiritual discipline, a faithful response to God's grace, and how people see their giving as part of their journey with Christ. Budgeting, we will be doing a workshop on budgeting too. You're getting into the technical stuff here soon. Planning your budget for your vision, mission, and vocation statements. Get out your vocation statement, your mission statement, your vision statement, whatever you call it, and use that to plan your budget. If you don't have one, we can help you develop one. The Presbytery has tools for that. Or you just use the great ends of the church found in the Book of Order, the proclamation of the gospel, the shelter and nurture and spiritual fellowship of the children of God, the maintenance of divine worship, the preservation of truth, the promotion of social justice, and the exhibition of kingdom of heaven to the world. That's a good thing to base your budget on. So budget should focus on your goals for ministry, not preserving the way things used to be. And just a reminder, sessions set the budget, not the congregation. And if you vote on a budget in January, but something happens in August, you know what? The budget can change, the session can change the budget. You don't have to have permission. You are in charge, the session is. So be flexible with your budget. It's not etched in stone as much as some churches like to think it is. And my last one I have is communicating for impact. We just had one on storytelling. You can find that video on our webpage. Tell your story often and well. Share how God is at work through your church. Use stories that illustrate the impact of generosity. Be transparent. We've been saying this all along. Be transparent about your finances. Share clear, understandable financial updates with the session and the congregation. Build trust by regularly communicating how funds are used. Say thank you. Be graciously and often send thank you letters that include financial summaries or impact stories. Express gratitude in personal, meaningful ways. Use multiple communication channels, like I've said before, social media, newsletters, worship, sermons, all those things are important. And shift the tone from scarcity to abundance. Connect communication to generosity and hope, not to fear and lack of what you don't have. Help your community see giving as a faithful, as a joyful and life-giving experience. We will take questions at the end, but I'm going to now, you're probably all thinking, well, there are other components. There definitely are. And if you want to stick them in the, once you think of, stick them in the chat, be really helpful to see them and other people to see them. But I'm going to now hand this over to John, who is going to talk about the financial planning template. So I gave the overall, and John's going to give you the details.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. And by the way, right, I mean, it really, what you said really sets up what we need to do, right? So, you know, there's a lot that Jean said. I'm sure you were taking notes. I took a couple of notes as well. But, you know, those things about, you know, managing through generosity, not scarcity, all that stuff, right? Being creative, like being to the mission. That it's amazing, right? That's the spirit, and that's how actually, you know, we achieve financial sustainability, right? So what I wanted to show you was just a little tool that can help us to really frame up, you know, are we as a church being sustainable? Are we, you know, are we going to continue to manage our finances, and are we able to continue to be healthy, not just to survive, but are we able to be healthy, you know, for the next several years? Okay. So, so I will share my screen. I think I can do that, Jean.
Yeah, let me stop sharing mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay. So this is an Excel sheet, right? So I'm a numbers person. Not everyone's a numbers person, and that's okay. But if I'll make it bigger too. I see people already starting to look in there. I've got tired eyes too. Sometimes I need to make it bigger. But what I want to do is share with you what the intention is, sort of, how it works, and then I'll go through an example, right? So I'm on the example right now, but I'll go through the instructions and the ideation, right? So the idea is to look backwards for the last 3 years and to look forward for the next 5 years and look at our estimates and actuals for expenses and income and our assets. And then when you sort of have that long view, multiple years stacked one over the other, then you can really say, oh, I see that, our expenses are growing, right? But maybe our pledges are declining slightly, or whatever that might be, whatever it looks like for your church, you'll see that. Okay. So here's the intention, right? So I'll make this a little bit bigger on the instructions tab. Okay. So basically we're going to look at income and expenses. And one thing that I will tell you from my experience, so I was, financial council lead for our church for 12 years, is that, it's important to get into the details. You kind of have to sort of scrutinize every line item as a council when you're really trying to understand where you're spending your money or where the income comes from. But when you're doing this long-term planning, you need to take a higher view. Okay. So rather than say, okay, here's pledge donations that are not pledged, the plate, the online giving, all that stuff, you might just have one group that says pledges, right? Or pledges and plates, right? Something like that. Because, I have too much detail, it just becomes a little bit hard to really see the big trends. Okay. So that's point one. Point two, we want to capture and record the last several years of actuals and income. Okay. So, I started, if you look at my example, I started with 2023 actuals. Okay. You can go back a little further than that if you want to. But certainly if you have 2 years of actuals, right, it gives you a little bit of a trend, right? It gives you a little bit of an idea what's happening there, right? So, without knowing what's happened in the past, it's hard to sort of predict the future. So at least 2 years. If you want to do more, that's fantastic if you have that information. Okay. Then we'll try to put together the current year income and expenses, right? So we're halfway done with this year right now. So, you can always, you can always make an estimate of the full year, right? Based on what you're seeing, right? Or, if you're struggling to do that, you can put the budget in for this year. But just make sure that your budget was realistic, right? Sometimes, I've seen organizations where they put in a budget that's not realistic and then it's misleading, right? So we always want to have realistic expectations for our finances and our planning. So ideally we try to estimate this current year, or if we try to have a realistic budget estimate. Okay. Now comes the hard part, right? This is the part where finance councils have to do a bit more work, right? Which is try to estimate the income and expenses for future years. Okay. Now, again, in my example, I put in 2026, 27, 28, 29, and 30, right? So I went 5 years out to think about what are my income areas and what are my expense areas for the next 5 years. Okay. So not so easy, right? And we'll go through that example, but this is where, you have to rely on trends, right? So if your pledges have been growing by 5% for the last 3 years, okay, that's a reasonable assumption that they'll continue to grow by 5% for the next 5 years. Or, your expenses, maybe your cost of living adjustment, and your salary increases for your staff is going up by 2% a year. Well, you might say, hey, I think we're going to do that for the future as well for our staff. Okay. Now, if you know other information that's going to happen, great, you can put that into. Okay. So we estimate the future years, right? And then, we've got this other piece of the puzzle, which is our assets and investments. Okay. So normally, when I got my reports as a finance council lead, I had one statement, which was sort of the monthly income and expenses, month and year to date, right? But I also had a statement which said, here's where our assets are, right? And they're different, right? I've got ins and outs during the year, my income statement, but then I've got my assets and my balance sheet. So we want to look at the assets in the past, and we want to understand, have we added to those assets? Fantastic, right? So legacy giving would be one example of where assets would grow. Or maybe we've withdrawn from those assets, right? So we said, oh my gosh, we had a $20,000 budget deficit last year. We needed to cover that. We didn't have, enough in sort of the core checking account for the church. So we moved $20,000 from our investments and our assets into our operational account. Okay. So again, for the last several years, what you did, right? What your investments were, what they started at, right? Whether you added or took away from them. And then ultimately, there's also probably some growth, right? So if you invested conservatively, you got some modest growth. If you invested aggressively, you got some very, handsome growth. Okay. So we'll put that again. We have a place for assets and investments. And you can see the current balance, right? So this happens to be an example from, a sample church from 2023. They started with $250,000. They needed to take out $40,000 for operations for the church. Okay, great. So that's leaves them with $210,000. But also they had some, nice growth. 2023 was a good year for stocks. And so, of the 210,000, well, that grew to 224,700. Okay. So you can sort of see what you did in the past, and then you try to predict what you did in the future. Okay. So once you've done that, right, then you can review the results, right? And sort of, check the assumptions, make sure it's reasonable and what have you. Okay. So that's the intention for the template, right? So I gave you everyone in this sheet a blank worksheet, right? So everything's blank to be filled in. You put in the groups of income, you put in the groups of expenses. There's some totals for the income and the expenses, and of course the income minus expenses, which is whether you're in the red or the black, as well as a little bit of a calculation for the assets and investments. Okay. So it's a pretty simple sheet, but actually, when you start doing it, okay, look, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the numbers, right? So let me walk you through the example. Is that okay? And maybe I'll even pause for a second before I go through the example. I just want to just make sure that the intention is understood, or if there's any questions. So feel free to go off mute or raise your hand. Okay. Hearing none, I'll continue. So let me go through the example with you. Okay. So this church put in, their actuals for 2023 and 2024. And, and they used a couple of things, built pledges, and the plate is one source of income. They had building use as another source of income. They had investment withdrawals, which, by the way, right, is variable, right? It's only as needed, right? It's like, oh, I think I'm going to need to take out 40,000 this year, or I did take out 40,000 in 2023. There's some other sources of income, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So you can sort of see what their total income was. Now, by the way, if you wanted to see, oh, what was our income if we didn't draw on our expenses, if we didn't draw on our investments, you can see that, right? You can say, oh my gosh, wow, we really needed a lot of our investments to cover our sort of monthly and annual expenses. And so do the same thing with the expenses. Well, we had personnel is a big bucket of expenses for most churches. Buildings and maintenance, also another big area of expense. And then there might be some other stuff in there as well. Okay. So again, if you look at the summaries of the sum of all these ones, the total expenses is the sum of these line items. The income is the sum of all those line items. Okay. And then you can sort of see for those actual years, right? How did we do? Right. So it's nice to always sort of take back, look back at, prior years and say, oh, we were okay. We did okay. We ended up a little bit above, we did end up a little bit below. And oh, by the way, sometimes we had to take more out of our investments. Sometimes we had to take less out of our investments. Okay. And then you kind of do the hard part, right? Which is now like, okay, I've got to estimate. So I've got, what are the pledges and plates going to be? I made the budget for 2025, but now John and Jean and, everyone's asking me to be financially sustainable and look out many years, right? So, well, we said 130, it's been 125, 124, 130. So in this case, the person put in 140, 140, 150, and 155. Okay. Now, what do you guys think? Well, maybe that's too aggressive, right? I mean, we've only been growing, but, actually in the actuals, we've been pretty flat, right? Even the estimate shows growth, but is that really going to come in this year? I don't know, right? So we can put 140 in and 140 and 150 and 155 and 160. But, as a good financial steward, you'd have to say, is that realistic? What grounds do we have to believe that, right? What's going to make that change, right? And maybe it is, hey, you know what? This year we really haven't done much with the stewardship campaign. We're going to do a much bigger stewardship campaign at the end of 2025. It's going to help us to grow from like 125 or 130 to 140. Okay. Now I have reason to believe, right? Building use. Okay. Well, building use. Okay. Maybe we've actually been delaying some building maintenance. Like we're going to, and the cost of living is going up and inflation is there. We're going to put higher levels here for the future. Great. Okay. How about other investments? Are we going to get other investments? Like let's work through that stuff, right? So by the way, right, one of the things that we encourage you to do, and you'll see it in I'll come back and summarize what you all have to do in a few minutes. But the one of the big things that I think works really well is to start with a as is baseline. Hey, we're not doing anything. This is just the trends. This is what's going to happen, right? So by the way, an as is baseline might be like 125, right? For 2026, 2027 to 2030. Hey, we're just doing the same old thing. And then you start to look and you're like, oh my gosh, my income and expenses are like, really, I'm starting to really get a budget deficit. If I don't do anything here, I'm going to have a problem. Okay. So finance councils usually start with a baseline. Okay. And then you start talking with session and you'll be like, hey, by the way, guys, our budget gap is going to grow over the next 5 years if we do nothing. That's sometimes a nice call to action, like a wake-up call for the session that says, yeah, we really do need to help the finance council to do the stewardship campaign. And we, each of us, in the session has to call members of the church and talk to them and, things like that. Or, other things like we might say, hey, maybe we were going to do that. We believe that we're going to get those numbers, but you know what? We need to have a new fundraising event. Okay. So whatever that fundraising event is, whether it's chicken dinners or something else, right? You might say, hey, we need a little more income, right? And so, we're going to try and do something on a smaller scale next year. And then we're going to try and expand that to future years. But again, finance council can put anything on a piece of paper, right? That's not meaningful. It's when you say, hey, by the way, without that, we're going to be in trouble, right? So we need to do something. And then session will say, all right, do we agree we're going to do this? Are we going to put the resources and the effort behind this? Okay, great. Then we can put it in. Okay. So, personnel, same way. We're going to like, hey, you know what? We think we're going to, we need to increase our staff, right? To really, get our mission going. Fantastic. Great. Let's put it in there. We need to have, buildings and maintenance. We have some big projects we're going to do. And by the way, you also may want to put a line item for capital expense projects, right? So the way I think most finance people think about it, there's sort of the day-to-day work that you have to do, right, for repairs or insurance or whatever it might be. But then there's like a big project that comes along, like Gene was saying, hey, we got to fix the roof, right? We've got to fix the parking lot. Well, typically that's a one-off project. It's a bigger number, right? And oh, by the way, right, it also gives you a chance to say, hey, we're fixing the roof. Let's have a separate fundraising drive to fix the roof, right? But if you said, we need to fix the roof in the next 3 years, well, you might say, oh, let's just do it in 2027. And how much is it going to cost? Oh, $40,000. Well, let's put it in there and let's figure out how we're going to get that money. Okay. Now, the last piece that I'll show you is that assets and investments. So I showed you already, right? Each year you start with some money, right? You have deposits or withdrawals, right? Then you have your growth rate on the remaining principal, and then you've got, your principal plus your interest, right? But, maybe you say, hey, you know what? We are going to try, and so by the way, I did this, this little sample, we did all the work here, we did the spreadsheet, we talked with session, and guess what? We still need to take out, between, 16 and $27,000 in the future. Okay. Well, we do have those funds. We won't run out by 2030, but we're going to dip into those funds. And as Gene said, right, by the way, fantastic presentation, Gene, right? It's not always about the rainy day, right? We can spend some of the stuff now. Sometimes spending stuff now will serve us well for the future, right? So we can sort of say, oh yeah, we're going to do something here. We're going to do something there, right? And we have an idea of what our assets and investments are going to be like in the future. Okay. Now, by the way, you also might say, like, I remember when I started on finance council, I was, for my church, like we were getting like 2%, right? And I was like, oh, what happened? Why are we getting 2%, right? So that actually caused us to go back and look and say, hey, we need to be a little more aggressive in our investments. And we've had some monies that are just sitting around and we should put them to work, right? So you may find that is something that we need to work on as well. Okay. So this little template, it's not so exciting, right? It's pretty straightforward. If you're an analytical person, you're like, oh yeah, this is easy. I could have created this, right? If you're not an analytical person and you need help, of course, myself and other folks within the presbytery can certainly help you. Okay. So what's the intention here? How are we gonna incorporate this into our work for our individual churches? Okay. So here's the intention. Okay. So hopefully can you guys all see my screen, this PowerPoint? Okay. I see the heads nodding. All right. So here's the intention. Okay. So in July and August this year, and this is for folks who are like, hey, we need to work on our financial sustainability. We need to do it, right? You start by developing the baseline. And the key word there is the baseline. Okay. So with the way that we're going, with the trends as they are, right? Growing membership, declining membership, more donors, less donors, more expenses, less expenses. Here's the trends, right? Here's where we look as is. Here's where we're heading, right? Currently. Okay. So that's largely the Finance Council can do that by themselves. Okay. You can do that work. And yeah, I'm proposing that we do that in July and August. So, we have to do that while you're at the beach, or you have to do that by the pool or in your backyard on your porch, right? But I think this kind of works as, all right, here's where we are currently, right? Then you get into the idea, say, well, we're not going to just do the same thing as we've done every year over year. We're going to brainstorm ideas. We're going to brainstorm ideas to improve our financial sustainability. Okay. So we've put that down for September and October. And really, that's a session activity. Okay. So the way that you could envision that would be, at the end of August, when you're having your session meeting, Finance Council can say, hey, you know what? here's our as-is plan for the next 5 years. And, you might get some gasps and some shock, right, from people who are not financially, involved, because you've given them a very clear and aggregate view, and they go, oh my gosh, really? We're gonna, for my church at one point in time, it was like, if we keep going, we're gonna use up all of our investments in 5 years. So we saw the need to change, right? It was a very clear need. But then after that, after you do that end of August session meeting, then you probably need a couple of sessions, or a couple of meetings, I should say, a couple of meetings with session where you can actually brainstorm. What should we do, right? What should we do around the stewardship campaign? And what do we think that's going to result in funding? Do we need better policies on building use? Do we want to try a new event? Are we going to promote legacy giving? And should we put a placeholder of, $100,000 for sometime in the next 5 years? Who knows? Okay. But that's the hard work. Okay. So getting together to talk with the whole session about brainstorming ideas is important. And it's on the income side, which, by the way, most companies and organizations have to grow their way out of things. They don't just it's very hard to save your way out of things, right? You keep squeezing and squeezing. It generally doesn't get you there. But you certainly have to look at the expenses too. There may be some hard decisions, exactly as Jean said. We have to face into that as good stewards. Okay. And then if you've had those 2 months working with session to brainstorm ideas, or have little subgroups and teams to come up with ideas, then you finalize this 5-year plan. And then guess what? You've got a very strong idea of where 2026 budget will land, because you've got people focused on it. You've got people driving different line items, whether it's on the income, expenses, or the investments. Okay. So I'll stop there and I'll stop sharing, although I can certainly go back to those sheets. So that's our mission, ladies and gentlemen. That's our challenge, right? And it's not easy, but I'd love to get your feedback or thoughts or questions on that work.
Either just raise your hand or unmute. And
John,
Yeah.
it's
Hello.
Cynthia. Thank you for that template, because I think it will be very helpful to show session the trends. I like that idea of the trending from previous years and the projection to future years. That's a very good tool.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. Yeah.
And I think it'll be very helpful for me.
I tell you what, it's, and the thing is, we talk about these things, but then when you sort of put it in a few simple numbers, right? I mean, that was ultimately, I can say from my personal experience, when I had went to our count, to our session, I said, hey, we're losing $50,000 a year. And in 5 years, we're going to run out of investment money and we're going to be stuck. That was the wake up call that everyone said, oh yeah, there are no sacred cows. We got to actually look at where we're spending our money and justify all those, and nothing's, guaranteed. And more importantly, we've got to be positive and thinking about the abundance of resources that we can garner too. So yeah, absolutely.
Pete, I see your hand.
Hi, Pete.
Hey, John, that was an excellent template. And I have made use of similar kinds of things in the churches that I have administered. The thing that I found useful for current year budgeting purposes is I used the past 3-year history for each of the line items in the budget in terms of what percentage of income for each income item came in any specific month, averaged over the 3-year period. And I did the same thing with expenses, which allowed me then to apply those percentages to those same line items in the current year budget, which gave the session and the church a better sense for how the money was going to be received and expended over the 12 months. as opposed to doing simply dividing everything by 12, which is an easy way of doing budgeting. If you're going to expect to spend $10,000 on personnel, you take 1/12 of it for every month, and that may or may not be the case. Vacation Bible School happens in 1 month of the year. All of the money for Vacation Bible School that you budgeted ought to be put in the budget for the year in which for the month or the couple of months in which it's going to be spent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and by the way, right, I think one of the things that you're pointing to is like, we're talking about the sort of the long-term plan, but then there's the connection to the current year plan, right? So, by the way, what I'm suggesting is that you use this template and keep it at an aggregate level. But some churches may say, hey, look, I'm going to go through all of the details, right? I mean, you have to ultimately get to the details to understand the groups. But, I think that for me, I start with the aggregate level, and then I can go into the details. If I'm going to the budget for next year, then I can say, yeah, I'm going to flow that out differently or what have you. But, so I think you're right. There's sort of that aggregate, like what's really happening, but then also you have to get into the details. You have to look at the phasing and understand those kinds of things, right? So you can definitely you can take this a lot further, I guess is my point. Well said, Pete. Other folks?
And this is meant to be a tool to help you, and you can adapt it for your situation.
Absolutely. Thanks. I was going to say that, Gene. Yeah, people can add to it, change it, do what they need to, right? Absolutely. It's a starting point for you.
Gene Woodman.
Yeah.
You're muted, Gene. Gene.
Yeah, I'm bad with pushing buttons tonight. Sorry about that. Bad with pushing buttons. So anyway, I'm the stated clerk and administrative co-leader for Coastlands Presbytery. So I'm the other Gene in the state of New Jersey.
Yeah, there's two of us.
And Johnny, I really appreciate what you've shared this evening. Several of us were on the Presbyterian Foundation's storytelling and developing narrative budgets workshop earlier today. And I can see how your template would adapt very quickly for a church that also would like to develop a narrative budget, because it gets it down into those categories. And the projections, I think, are also very helpful, as they keep reminding us line item budgets are for sessions and finance committees. Narrative budgets are for the folks who get to see the presentation and just need to see their part of the ministry. So thank you very much for this tool.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you, Gene.
And
Nice to-
I remind you that we will be doing a workshop on narrative budgets late July. And Gene and I were both on that foundation workshop thing today. There were two parts, and they recorded them. We're going to get links. I will put those links on our webpage so you can have access to them, because I think the one on legacy giving and plan giving was excellent. So we'll have that tool, that resource available for you too a little bit later, as soon as I get it. Jeff, I think I see you waving your hand there. Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Hi, Gene. Thanks. First off, these financial sessions are really helpful. So I've been on our local session for a while, but haven't been dialed into the different seminars that the Highlands Presbytery is doing. So kudos to you and your team for doing this work. The question I have was for John also. John, we in our little church are finding ourselves where I guess you folks were a couple of years ago, and we're burning through, whatever savings we have, and we're probably at a year or two out from having to make some really tough decisions as to how we proceed. So, can you share any thoughts or any things that you might have learned, lessons learned from that process that you went through? We've started the process and we're making changes, but anything that you can provide might be helpful, not just for us, but other churches that are suffering the same fate.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a lot to unpack in those kinds of discussions. I mean, it took a long time and a lot of very hard discussions. To simplify it, I would say this. I would say that we restructured some of our costs because we needed to do that. And again, that's the hard decisions, right? In some cases, people got a pay cut, right? Or we said, hey, we don't. This position is critical. Like, we're thinking about youth, right? Other positions, maybe we have to do something differently, and we had to get creative. Even I remember, I'll just give you one little vignette, right? We would give like $4,000 to the deacons to do some of their work, and we said, hey, we got to cut that budget. And they said, no, we get this every year. We get this every year. It's like, well, actually, it's not entitlement. You don't get it. And by the way, they started fundraising for themselves, and guess what? They found their own money doing parking lots and things like that. Doing parking for craft fairs. But we actually, I think that if I was going to simplify it, we restructured some of the costs, and it took 2 years to sort of get a balanced budget. And then we built, but as we were doing that, we were building up the income, right? You can't save your way out of it. You've got to, use your resources and the abundance to grow your way out of it, right? Because expenses don't go down, they generally go up, right? Inflation and other things like that. So, but actually, I think, doing some of that restructuring gave people the sense that, oh, I do want to donate to this church. I can give this church. This church is going to be an ongoing concern, and actually kind of reinvigorated us a little bit. And and then by the way, then you get to all the other things like how do we outreach for our community? How do we find members? But that actually came a little bit more organically, I have to say, right? Just feeling like, hey, it's possible, right? And we can do stuff, right? We structured ourselves a little bit differently, and then a little bit of that pressure was off, and then you could see people giving a bit more or being welcoming and trying to do a bit more that was for the mission of the church, but also had the benefit of financial importance as well. But I think the other thing for me was New Jersey is it's a wealthy state relative to other states, right? And depending on your congregation, I mean, yes, they may be small, but that there are funds out there, right? And we can unlock them. Okay, so just a couple little things, right? There's a lot more probably to talk about, and every church is different.
Right. Thanks.
Other questions or comments or? Well, thank you then. This is being recorded, and the recording will be available on our webpage, so you can share it with others. That webpage, we put in as much resources as we find, so you can find everything we talked about will show up there eventually. Our next one, like I said, is July, what did I say? July 8th. And it's on investments. It will be, let me open it so I can tell you exactly who. Brad Masters, and who's Vice President of Client Engagement with New Covenant Trust, and Jim Carey, not the actor. We always laugh with him. He's Vice President, Director of Investments and Portfolios. They will be talking about investments in your church, and about investing also in this kind of volatile market at this time. This is makes some people a little nervous, but they have some good things to share and to help you with. So that will be July 8th, and the registration is available right now. It just, like I said, it just came up, and I'm actually going to put the link right there in the chat, so you can register right now. So thank you again, and for coming, and we're available if you have questions. John's available, I'm available, and Pete, if you're still on, he's also a really good resource. He's kind of our go-to guy here, also for the presbytery. So we're all here to help you and answer any questions and provide any, a place for you to ask or to share stories. So let's pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this day and this time together. We ask that your Spirit be with us as we look with joy and hope for the future of our churches. Guide us and lead us to the best way to serve you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, everybody. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.